We're going to chat today about next year. I'm sure that your mind is racing right now on end of year giving. We're going to talk about what are the big macro trends shaping the next coming year, and also what legislation has happened and what legislation could be coming down the pike, and what will that mean for our world. So some really cool stuff. As usual, if you have any questions at any point, there's a little Q&A button in your webinar. You guys are all muted for your sanity and mine, but do that. First things first, big shout out to my colleague Simone, who as usual goes to bat for everybody on this call. Make sure that this is CFRE approved, so 1.0 CFRE credits. This is for your professional development. If you know what it is, great. If not, it's a professional development certification for fundraisers. And we know that a lot of you don't have the professional development budgets you might have had 2 years ago, harder to go to conferences. This is approved. You can also, by the way, go back to previous webinars, watch those, also approved. The way you get credit for this is you just make a little note in the survey we put at the end. So make sure you do that. Agenda, I won't read all of this today. What I do want to say is that we are going to send you the recording and the slides after today. So if you want to take notes, go for it. If you want to just sit back and enjoy your coffee and your lunch, also cool. Maybe you think, wow, this is really good, but like my colleague Linda really needs to hear this. We'll send it to you. You can send it to Linda. So that will all be happening. Quick intros. I know many of you, but my name is Patrick. I'm lucky to be the co-founder and co-CEO of FreeWill. I am in New York City right now, where it is a little bit cold, hence the indoor vest, alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny. Our team is amazing. A lot of love and hard work went into this presentation by them and not me. So we're more than 110 folks right now. We're really closing in on $5 billion raised for charity, which we're super excited about, in planned gifts and stocks and QCDs and some other stuff that we're working on. So just a huge shout out to the other folks on the FreeWill team that are listening. Thank you for all of your hard work for all of us, and then for all of the great partners we get to work with. Another thing before we get started, we just want to go to bat for you, and we're really excited that you're here for an hour. So as we look forward to 2022, we're going to be giving away this book called Designing Your Work Life to 20 people. This book, by the way, is sort of an addendum to another book called Designing Your Life, which I cannot recommend highly enough. Designing Your Life is based on the most popular undergraduate class at Stanford. And it really helps all these folks sort of thinking about, I can do anything, what do I actually do? And how do I make really big decisions? This book is a little bit narrower, but thinking about your professional context. So as you think about what kind of career, what kind of work life you want to build in 2022, this is an excellent thing. Make a note in the survey at the end of it. We'll send it to 20 folks. If you don't get it, you can always buy it on Amazon. But we really like doing this, and it's really nice to get the notes from the people that get it. Kevin asks, by the way, how do I come up with the books? Actually, Simone and I every week think, what is the nicest thing we can do for people? Where are people thinking about right now? What is the book that's going to help? So in the past, we've given away books on macro trends in the future. We've given books on mindfulness when end of year stuff is particularly crazy. We've given books on sort of creative thinking. So if you ever have suggestions, feel free to put them in the chat. Great question, Kevin. All right, so we asked you all how your week is going. And you can see this trend from all the way to the beginning of the pandemic up until now. We are 18 months into these sessions. And you see the blue line is happiness, making some good progress here, a little bit lower than a few weeks ago, but things like anxiety aren't off the charts. And so generally people are doing well. Also from a confidence scale on how you're feeling about hitting your goals, we're roughly where we were last week, a little bit lower than earlier in the year. But hopefully this session will help you think a little bit more about things you can do this year on top of next year. And then lastly, before we get into some of the meat of this, we asked you how you're thinking about, what are you thinking about in 2022? And a lot of really hopeful stuff: growth, increase, inspired success, plans, more stability, more building, more engagement, more community, more relationships. So I think there's a really positive feeling going into 2022, which is super exciting. All right, so as we think about 2022, we asked you actually how you're thinking about your own organizations. A couple really interesting things. When we look back at the year past, we said, how has planned giving changed? 2021, 37% said increased. Very small decrease. So what you can see here is that planned giving is on the rise year over year. 34% stayed the same, and then 25% said don't know. So very little decrease, very significant increases. pretty exciting. Do we think your organization is going to see a planned giving increase? 64% of you said yes. Basically, no one said it's going down. A couple people said say the same, and then some people didn't know. So I think we'll get into this later, but one of the things you'll see is that year after year after year after year, over the next 20 years, you're going to see planned giving play an increasingly big role every single year. Same thing on major giving. 48% of you said, wow, major giving was up last year, or this, meaning the last 12 months. Congratulations, that's super exciting. Only 10% said down. Some of you didn't have access to the data, and 28% stayed the same. So you can sort of mentally benchmark against other folks here. Do we think we're going to see an increase in major giving next year? 56% said yes. Very few people again said going down. 27% said stay the same. And again, some people don't know. We also asked you, so you can get a little benchmark, do you currently take these gifts? Yes, no, or are you planning to? What you can see is that stock, donor advised fund, bequest, qualified charitable distributions, all very similar. Some room to grow on the QCDs. If you don't take QCDs yet, we'll go into those later. Super, super important, fastest growing type of philanthropy in the US. Also cryptocurrency, a lot of folks don't, but a decent number of people are thinking about doing it in 2022. Other things we asked, so you can get a sense of what other people are thinking about. What will your events look like in 2022? About 49% said in person, a lot more than half said hybrid, right? So, why these numbers don't add up to 100, not sure. I think you could have chosen more than one. But so we're really seeing a shift back to in-person and back to hybrid events. We're hearing from a lot of donors that, some people don't feel like they don't miss the galas, that they're happy to give anyway. And so I think you'll see a little bit more accommodation of more folks there. Lynn, by the way, congratulations. She says you hit her foundation goal in September, which is wild. So a big win to you. Congrats, Lynn. All right, so what are we going to look at for 2022? We're going to talk about some macro trends, and then we're going to talk about legislation. So we'll separate those two because they both have a really important role to play in giving. A couple of things we've talked about frequently, but we're just going to name them in case you haven't been here. There are two big trends that are happening right now and will continue. The first is a rising stock market. We're hitting new records every week. This is really exciting for giving. Stock market is one of the biggest indicators or biggest factors going into philanthropic giving. And then aging donor demographics, right? So this is going to happen no matter what as we go year over year. We'll talk about how that affects folks. This is super important. So talking about the stock market, S&P up 68% from March to December of last year, another 22% this year, which is pretty awesome. I mean, it's pretty remarkable to see a 22% increase. The whole market cap of the US stock market is $48 trillion. So this is obviously a lot of money. If you don't know what a market cap is, it's basically how many shares of stock are there for each company, what is the price of that share, and then you add it all together, right? So $48 trillion. I believe the biggest one here is Apple as the $2 trillion company. Microsoft is up there. Could be wrong though, so if anybody wants to fact check me, feel free to add that in the chat. When we look at it, I mean, this is just the growth year over year. You have some dips. This is a really important thing to understand, stock market cap in trillions. Why? Because we often read the news. The market was up 3% today. It was down 2%. It was up 4%. It was down 1%. What actually, most of the investing of your older donors happened in 2013 or 1999 or 1986. And so the growth that you're seeing over time is just enormous. And it's, the 22% number is incredible over the last year. It's really a small fraction of the growth in the portfolios of a lot of your donors and a lot of the folks that we know. So that's really big. What does it mean? Let's see if we can get some animations happening here. Obviously, there's some means that gifts of stock are going to go up, right? So that's pretty obvious. You get one share of Tesla this year, compared to last year, it's going to be much, much bigger. Tim says, are you going to address inflation? Yes, Tim, we're going to get to that. So I'm really excited you asked about that. The second is around qualified charitable distributions. These are gifts out of IRA accounts. Those of you that come more frequently will know all about these. These accounts mainly invest in mutual funds while they're in it. So all of the retirement accounts are growing, mostly a good thing for people with retirement accounts. It also means that 4% or whatever the gift amount or the RMD amount out of this is also growing 20%. So that's very exciting. And then don't forget about donor advised funds. Money in donor advised funds is traditionally also invested in mutual funds and some other stuff, but mutual funds is a very common way to do it. And so that's also growing. So if you had $10 million in a DAF last year and you didn't give any of it away, you might have $12 million this year. And so there's actually much more impetus to put away. Super exciting. All right, so that's a big one. So, understanding the growth in the stock market. By the way, if you hear the stock market goes down 1 or 2%, it's probably going to happen. You get these sort of bad days and good days. Remember the big picture of really big growth this whole year, and remember the even bigger picture of really big growth over the last few decades. Let's talk about aging donor demographics. So the oldest baby boomers are turning 76 next year. 76 is relatively old. They're not the largest generation anymore, but they're the largest percentage of donors. They make up 41% of all donations. They make up 55% of high net worth donors, right? So millennials have overtaken them in terms of pure numbers of people, but in terms of donors and how much money, baby boomers is still where it's at. In a prior survey, you guys said that more than half of your donors are over 65. So this is still a huge area of concentration. Don't get too distracted by millennials. They will make up a very small percentage of your giving this year and next year. Here's a graph over time of babies being born in the United States. So this is births per 1,000 women. You can see a massive increase starting in 1946 and then continuing on to 1966. So that you get 10,000 people turning 75 every single day. Boy, this is going to continue for the next 10 years. So it's pretty easy to think about this. We'll go into this a little bit more, but do not lose sight of older donors while you're thinking about also expanding into other folks. Super important stuff around QCDs, obviously. So donors who are turned 70.5 can start making these gifts out of your IRA. It's also super, super important for planned giving, right? So this group owns between 30 and $60 trillion. There is 72 million boomers in 2019. We expect that 9 million of them will pass away in the decade between 2019 and 2029, and then 2031, continue. And so, what this looks like is, as we think about the population, obviously boomers are sort of, aging and passing away. Silent generation will be gone by about 2035, 2036. Gen X and millennial tend to take a much larger portion of it, right? So as we think about this, it's helpful. Anne asks a quick question, so I'll interrupt here. Anne says, I thought the age for QCD was changed to 72. Not true. So you can still make a QCD, which is a gift out of your IRA, as soon as you're 70 and a half. At 72, the government says you have to start taking money out of your IRA. So there's even more reason to send that to charity. So that's the important difference there. Thank you, Anne. Janet also says, can you confirm that the RMD is suspended in 2020 due to the pandemic and the resulting stock market crash and is reinstated for 2021? That is exactly right. So there are definitely RMDs this year. There will almost definitely be RMDs next year. So QCDs are going to be back with a vengeance. Fun fact, they actually went up last year, even without the RMDs. That's how powerful this is and how many people are coming on board. When you think about aging populations, this is what it's going to look like. So we're in that 2020 world. You can see that the population of 65 to 84-year-old folks is going to be growing. This is a really important donor demographic. It's actually getting bigger. Your 18 to 64 is growing, and your under 17 is getting a little bit flat. Why is that? Relatively low, longer lifespans, relatively low birth rates. So the makeup of the United States is changing pretty dramatically. I mean, look at how many folks are in that 65 to 84 range compared to, say, 2000. It's a really different economy and everything else. This will be a big shift. What else is happening? We had a question about inflation. This is a really, really important topic. So inflation is happening quickly. This is what inflation looks like. These calculations are roughly year over year. So when we say 6.2% in October, what we don't mean is 6.2% compared to September. What we do mean is 6.2% compared to October of last year, right? So inflation, pretty serious and going up pretty high right now. We just said this, sharpest increase since 1990. This is a really big deal. I mean, there's a risk of going back to sort of the Carter administration in terms of inflation. It is much faster than the Fed wants. Salaries are unlikely to keep up at the same pace. So there's, that's not so good. The other thing is that for your organization, $100 in 2022 is worth less than it will be in 2020, right? Obviously same amount, but in terms of buying textbooks, buying building materials, buying food, it's not going to be as valuable. And so we really need to think about how do we keep up with inflation in a way that makes sure we can actually fulfill the goals of our organization, not just hit our fundraising goals, which might be artificially too low based on inflation. The risk here is that the mental model of donors doesn't keep up at the same rate of inflation. So if someone gave $100 in 2021, they will likely do that again in 2022, but it's not going to be as useful to your organization, right? So this is a real challenge that we're facing as we think about inflation. So it's more important then to focus on things that are rising with inflation, stocks, QCDs, DAFs, that will grow over time and will keep rising rather than this mental anchor. So what else we need to know about here? Most of your major donors are going to have some of this stuff, right? They're going to have stocks. Many of them will have donor advised funds. Many of them will have IRAs. So there's a really big opportunity now. And what you really want to do is focus on those appreciated assets, because as the sort of market booms overall, those are growing even faster than inflation. So there, it does somewhat shrink the overall growth of it. But if you think about a 20% growth and 6% inflation, it's still 14% bigger than it was last year in terms of real value. Okay, a couple other things to think about. You may want to go back and look at your fundraising page checkout. And many of you will have these little suggestions, right? 25, 50, 75, 100. Should those go up? Should we start, as people start spending more elsewhere, should we be moving those to 35, 45, 75, et cetera, right? It's a very small thing to check. I would check it this week. You may want these to go up. You also may want to think about, do a quick double check if you're a fundraising leader. Is the goal that we set out for ourselves, is that going to actually cover the cost that we projected? Or do we need to actually turn up the dial 10% in terms of getting more fundraising, right? This is a really important thing. So those are a couple of macro trends, right? What are the big macro trends? 1, rising stock market. 2, aging demographics. 3, inflation. We'll talk more about how to address some of these in a moment, but just have a mental model of what are the big things happening in the world. Now let's talk a little bit about legislation. That's one of the other things that's going to shift the way people are giving. Just a quick reminder here, people don't give because of tax incentives for the most part, but they do change how they give because of tax incentives, and how they give has a really big impact on the amount. So we always tell people, who are trying to really hit their goals, yes, you can get people twice as interested. You can double your donors. That's super hard. You can get larger gifts from the same people by changing the way they give. So a lot of nonprofits are moving to saying, asking for stock first, asking for a QCD first, asking for a DAF gift first, and then falling back on cash. So this is really important. So what has happened? Well, let's just sort of break this into 2 categories. So the infrastructure bill recently passed, I believe signed by President Biden yesterday. Someone tell me if that's wrong. This passed, this is going to be law, done deal, negotiations happen already. Then we have the Build Back Better bill, which is being discussed. That could pass. So when we talk about that, we'll be looking at some of the proposals, understanding the implications of those, but of course we'll update you as things change and get finalized. Big news here, so not a lot of tax changes, but we've changed the way that crypto is being treated. And it doesn't mean anything different from the math standpoint, but it's going to increase the reporting requirements for key exchanges, which means things like Coinbase, who are helping people buy and sell Bitcoin, are going to have to start sending more information to the IRS. Now, what does this mean? It means it's going to give the IRS more insight into the personal information and gains of these folks. And then it's also going to put more attention on the tax benefits and the taxes around cryptocurrency. What does it mean for giving? This doesn't go into effect until 2024. There's still time for amendments. But with capital gains being watched more closely by the IRS, crypto will become an even more common way for owners to donate, right? Much like stock. And you're going to see a lot more millennials give this because that's who owns crypto, and Gen Xers compared to boomers. This is going to be a really important thing next year, right? And the year after. So super important. Just as a side note, our team, all those really 100 beautiful people who are super smart, are working really hard on some cool innovations around crypto giving. Not public yet, not ready for public consumption. If you would like to hear about them as soon as they're ready, make a note in the survey and we will send you an email and give you a big update as soon as that happens. So sorry not to share more, don't mean to be a tease, but I will get shot if I share more before it's ready for public. All right, let's talk about future legislation. And really, this is the giant reconciliation bill that's going through Congress. A couple of things that are happening. Well, this is actually separate from the reconciliation bill. The $300 above the line deduction is likely going away. So the CARES Act created a temporary deduction for those who don't itemize deductions of up to $300 in 2020. This was extended and boosted to $600 for married couples in 2021. It seems unlikely, based on the latest IRS guidance, that this is going to happen again in 2022. Okay. So what it means is that right now, 90% of Americans do not itemize their taxes, which means 90% of Americans will receive zero tax benefit from cash gifts in 2022, right? So the limited benefit in 2021, because a lot of your donors are going to hit that 600 threshold by giving to their church or their college or whatever else, in addition to giving to you. So this is really, really valuable. So it's another reason to go big on some of these non-cash gifts that have additional tax benefits compared to cash. So that's a big one. Second big one, many of you have heard about the ACE Act. This is a bipartisan act, I believe, introduced in June by Senator Grassley, I think the oldest current member of the Senate, also could be wrong there, from Iowa, Republican, and Angus King, independent from Maine, independent but caucuses with a Democrat. So you see some real strong connection here. And its purpose is to reform private foundations, but particularly donor advised funds, and make sure stuff going to donor advised funds actually goes to charity. So this could be a really big deal if it passes. Let me talk more about this. So it's going to divide things into two categories: qualified DAFs and non-qualified DAFs. Our best estimate is that all of the major DAFs that you know about, the Fidelities, the Schwabs, the Vanguards, et cetera, they're all going to fall into the qualified DAFs. So we're not going to talk too much about the non-qualified DAFs. Qualified DAFs, all the big ones again, are going to require payouts within 15 years of the contribution date, right? So anything goes in has to come out within 15 years. Second, and this is really important, it changes the income tax deductions available for DAF contributions. So for qualified DAFs, cash and publicly traded assets like stock will still get an immediate deduction. But non-publicly traded assets wouldn't until the DAF sponsor sold them. So if you're giving art or real estate or 30 shares of a startup that hasn't IPO'd yet, isn't public, that you don't actually get a real-time tax donation in this context. Instead, it waits till it gets sold, and then the donor gets a tax benefit. So this is a really important shift. For non-qualified DAFs, again, we don't expect this to be a lot of things, but we're going to talk about it anyway. No deductions at all for cash contributions until they're distributed. No deductions for property until the property is sold and distributed, property including things like stocks. This is going to make folks less likely, in both of these cases, to use them as tax havens for things like real estate, art, and non-publicly held stock. What's the impact there? So there's more restrictions on DAFs. Donors may see more tax benefits from giving directly to folks like you, which is really, really good news. More complex gifts like stock, and especially things like non-publicly traded assets, more likely to go straight to charity if this becomes law, right? As DAFs won't get you that immediate tax deduction. 60% of the funds going into DAFs are non-cash assets, right? So this is a really huge portion of DAF stuff is in some of these categories. And so what it means is that if this happens, giving to you directly is going to get more and more appealing. And it's an even stronger case to keep getting smarter about these non-cash gifts. Thing three, this is super, super important. So if you've only sort of like perked your ears up for 2 minutes, do it right now. Capital gains taxes may increase. As of early November, the proposed increase in the top marginal capital gains tax rate is around 32% at the federal level. Now, this is a negotiation. It could go lower, right? this would be accompanied, this would be accomplished by an 8% surcharge on top of the current rate of 20% plus the 3.8% surcharge that's already happened. So let me go a little slowly here. Some of you, this is gonna feel pretty basic. Some of you might just need a refresher. Capital gains are taxes paid, usually on investments, the difference between what I bought it for and what I sold it for. So if I buy Tesla stock at $10, sell it for $50, have a $40 capital gain, and I pay federal taxes on this. Again, this final rate is in debate right now. It may not go up at all, but it very likely could. Let's look at what that actually means. So this is from the Tax Foundation. Tax Foundation, just in full disclosure, pretty anti-tax, but they do have really good maps. So we're going to show this. What does this demonstrate? It shows the top capital gains rate based on what we might see in terms of this 31% plus the state income tax. Because when I pay capital gains on something, I'm going to pay federal capital gains tax plus, in most states, income tax, state income tax on that amount. So take a look just for a moment and actually go find your state. So in California, 45% cap, biggest one, New York, 43%. Now, those are two of the wealthiest states in the country. You can look at a place like Texas or Florida that doesn't have any income tax, still 32% roughly. So super, super interesting. Minnesota high, Oregon high, Washington state, one of these interesting things that I believe has a capital gains tax, but not an income tax. And so if you're a Washington state charity, this is going to be super important too. Okay, so what happens if that happens? If capital gains taxes increase, then things like giving stock are an even better way for your wealthiest donors to give. They'll save on capital gains taxes, and they can take an income tax deduction for the full value of the stock. With these changes, if this happens, you're going to see a massive increase in stock giving from your major donors and I think from some of your smaller donors. As a side note on the legislation, there may be a 5% income tax surcharge on incomes above $10 million, and then another 3% for incomes above $25 million. Now, most of your donors don't make this much money. I would assume that most of us don't make this much money. If you do, God bless you. But for your folks at the very top end, this is going to be astronomical. So I want to show you what this looks like because the numbers are actually just remarkable. This is our hypothetical friend, George. George is a very high earner. So George earns between 10 million and 25 million, right? God bless George, good for him. George wants to donate $50,000 of his Netflix stock, bought at $10,000. Actually, before we even go walk through the math, in the chat, take a guess at how much in taxes George is going to save on his $50,000 gift. So just give me a percentage, 5%, 10%, 130%, 50%. Let's do 15 seconds of enter in the chat your best guess. 20%, 30%. Brenda's going big with 150%. Kathy, 100. Some 85. All right, we're all over the map. Joshua says enough. All right, let's go through this. We have a couple of people that are close. So federal capital gains tax avoided, 12,700, right? This is in the new world where we're jacking up rates to about 32%, right? It's 32% of $40,000. He also avoids all this California state income tax, right? He lives in San Francisco. What else happens? He gets a $22,000 federal income tax deduction. Now, again, this little asterisk is here because he's a high earner. So he's getting that surcharge for being over 10 million. His state income tax savings, right? Because now that we're deducting the gift from federal taxes, from state income taxes, another $6,600, right? About 13% state income tax in California at the very top levels. Total savings is 91% of his stock gift, right? 45,670. So now you can see if you are a smart, savvy gift officer who can talk to wealthier donors about stock giving, especially wealthier folks, especially in high tax states, you see this incredible savings. Now, remember, if he was above the $25 million threshold, again, not a ton of people are going to be, but some folks will be. That goes up to about 94%. So we're already looking at a 10-to-1 impact for cost. Could get up to 20-to-1 impact for cost. So really, really, really striking. This is an outlier, but I wanted to push everyone to show what's possible here. So let's take Rhonda from New Jersey. Same gift, 50,000 Netflix, bought at 10,000. Federal capital gains tax avoided, roughly similar. State income tax avoided, a little bit less because New Jersey is a lower tax state, still relatively high for the country, much lower than California. Federal income tax savings, she's at a lower tax bracket than Georgia's. State income tax savings, New Jersey doesn't have any charitable deduction. New Jersey should probably fix that, but worth noting. And so she saves about $30,000, so almost 60% of her gift. So this is someone who's, we call mass affluent, probably makes $400,000, has a bunch of investments, and this is still an incredibly powerful way to give. Bridget asks, when you say savings and avoided, are you double counting state income tax? Bridget, yes, but that's intentional, because what we're seeing here is you don't pay income tax on the capital gains and you get an income tax deduction. Again, not in New Jersey, but in some states that offer this type of deduction. And so you get the deduction and avoid the capital gains. That's why stock giving ends up being so powerful. So great question from you. Okay, I hope that math is at least somewhat clear. Feel free to watch it again in the video, but you can see how powerful this stuff is. And once we get donors into this mode of stock giving, they think, why am I doing anything else? I mean, the amount of money we're saving here is just remarkable. A couple more things to watch as legislation happens. What we call SALT deductions may increase. SALT, state and local taxes, SALT, these may increase its cap from 10,000 to 73,000. What are these? So basically in states that tend to correlate with being blue states, but higher tax states, you can now deduct the taxes you pay, potentially, if this goes through, to your local entities from your federal taxes. This got capped earlier in the Trump years. This would mostly benefit higher earners in blue states. It does mean that more people are going to claim the deduction and more people are going to move into itemizations, which should increase benefits for charitable giving. So we're keeping an eye on this, especially in metro areas, especially in higher tax areas. They will be able to deduct more of their gift, right? So that's pretty interesting stuff. We're keeping an eye on that. Other thing, limits on mega IRAs. So another thing we're looking at is there's preventing more money from being put into IRAs tax-free from people who are making more than $400,000 if their accounts already have $10 million in them. It would also require people with an IRA over 10 million to take minimum distributions. Peter Thiel, Peter Thiel, I guess, very famous founder of PayPal, has like a $5 billion IRA because he put a whole bunch of PayPal stock in there and some other stuff. And then that all grew tax-free. So that's being targeted. Really important thing to know, this doesn't go into effect until 2029. So we will keep you updated over the next 8 years if this is going to happen. So don't stress about it, but just wanted to sort of show what else is potentially in the bill that we'll be thinking about. All right, so now we know what's happening in the world. Let's spend 10 minutes or so talking about what do we actually do about it. So the first thing is do an inflation audit. You can just print out the slide. There's a real risk that the money you raise won't match the programmatic needs in 2022 if inflation continues. So here's a list of stuff that you want to think about. 1, is your budget realistic? Are we building in expense growth, even if we don't plan to buy more, right? If you did 100 meals last year, you do 100 meals this year, are we making sure we're budgeting more money for that? Are we increasing the amount that our MGOs, our major gift officers, are targeting in their ask so we can make sure we're keeping up here? Are we putting a massive focus on non-cash gifts that may rise with inflation as opposed to cash, which is going to get worse, right? It's really important. Is our planned giving all in on percentage gifts? We're going to talk more about this in a moment. This is super important. If you have a planned giving team and they are not all in on percentage gifts, this is going to be the single biggest shift you can make in a very short amount of time. All right, number 2. So we've done our inflation audit. Number 2, make sure your whole team is really smart on non-cash giving. Before the last webinar, we asked you how confident you were about different gifts. These are the averages: 3, 3, 3 on stocks, bequests 3, and then obviously a little bit more confident in cash giving. Every single person on your team should be good with non-cash asks, and they should start there and then use cash as a less good backup option. We see that this is the #1 factor in team success. How well trained are your staff members in non-cash giving? It's really worth surveying your whole development staff, including your ED, maybe even including your board, to start gauging confidence in all these types of gifts, so we can actually really focus the sort of training and upskilling in the areas that might be weaker. This is super, super, super important, right? You have a lot of folks who went into development because they're super excited about the nonprofit world, but may not be as sort of financially comfortable in some of these conversations. And you really want to make sure that just, a half hour, an hour of really focused training can change someone's confidence level around stocks, around other things, and just result in dramatically larger gifts. If you are a FreeWill partner, first of all, thank you. Lots of love to you. But we've created these master classes around QCDs and stocks. It is 100% worth your team taking them. If not, don't worry. We still want to get your back. There are a couple of really key resources. On September 28th, and this is linked, we'll send you the slides afterwards, we did a big session on older donors with a big focus on QCDs. So you can learn a lot about those. Sorry, that just linked out immediately. Let's go back here. But anyway, now you know that link works. Let's go back into presentation mode here. So big focus on QCDs. August 24th, we had a really big deep dive on donor advised funds and how to get more donor advised fund gifts. On March 16th, we did a whole big thing on stock giving. You can just watch this. You can watch it on double speed if it makes you happier. But really, really important to get up to speed on this stuff. As you think about all this, you really want to get ready to go all in on stock giving in case these capital gains go up, which is looking very promising. So just as a reminder, organizations that focus on stock giving versus focus only on cash grow 5 times faster, which is pretty important. And when capital gains taxes go up, there's going to be 2 things that happen at the same time. First, stock giving becomes even more advantageous for donors compared to cash. So cash gets worse, stock giving gets better. And there's going to be a ton of attention placed on this by donors, by financial advisors who are trying to figure out, okay, the world's changed. What does that mean for me? So Rick, I see your joke. Thank you. That's a good one. All right. Step 3, give donors a clear pathway to non-cash gifts. This is super important. Every time someone who could give you something like QCs or stocks give you cash, you are losing money. This is more true with inflation and rising markets. So you want to make sure this stuff is linked on your donate page and not just buried on the ways to give page. When possible, you want to clearly outline steps for people to actually how they can do this. If you haven't already set up your website to do it, do this now before end of year giving. Super, super, super important. This is an example of what it looks like when you click donate on Second Harvest of Silicon Valley, who does world-class work and also gets a ton of non-cash gifts. So they have really good options for donating stock, matching gifts, QCDs, et cetera. And this is pretty exciting. It results in a lot of gifts. One other big thing that people are doing is they're joining a lot of nonprofits doing Stock Monday. So the day before Giving Tuesday, hundreds and hundreds of folks around the country, meaning hundreds of nonprofits, are emailing donors about priming them to make stock gifts on Giving Tuesday. So you end up with much larger gifts from the same people. Super exciting. We will send you a sample email in case you want to partake here, because this is one of the best things you can do to really blow out Stock Tuesday. So that's cool. Step 4, as we talk about older donors, this is really, really important, right? So your older donors are deciding right now who gets estates after they pass. If your nonprofit isn't securing gifts in their wills or their trusts, you are going to miss out on these massive gifts, oftentimes 1,000 times larger than a typical gift. That is not hyperbole, that's just math. You should be sending all of your supporters, regardless of age, thinking about ways to make planned giving super easy for them, right? So we really think about, do we have a plan in place for planned giving going forward? This will be really valuable. There are a couple key times where this is especially useful. Things like January. So we often lean into things like New Year's resolutions to get your affairs in order. Planned giving tends to be not as huge a thing. in end of year giving, but then January is a really good time where people are thinking, okay, what do I need to do this year? We see a lot of success there. And then even folks who don't regularly donate can still make bequests. So as inflation happens, right, more people, especially retirees, are gonna be feeling a little bit of a spending squeeze and maybe drawing back on their giving, but they can still make these really large bequests. So it's a really good time to keep your focus on planned giving. The other thing is just really get our heads around the sort of like the zoomed out calendar. So of our current 76-year-olds, meaning the oldest baby boomers, 16 are going to pass away in the next 4 years, right? 16%, 27% in the next 6 years. So it's actually really important that we have these conversations now. And then when we're doing this, please, 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 please make sure you're asking for percentage gifts. These gifts are on average 8 times larger, and they're what we call inflation hedged. So if someone 10 years ago said, I'm going to give you $50,000, you might have said, that's amazing. And now what we're seeing is every year that $50,000 becomes less and less valuable. Now, if they had said, we're going to give you 10% of the estate, and now we're building in all the stock market growth, all the appreciation of their house, et cetera, that gift might be worth much more. And so it's really important that in all things planned giving, we're leading with inflation gifts, percentage gifts, and not like fixed cash amounts. So you want to go through every single piece of your planned giving material, make sure this is mentioned. If you have sample language on your website, which a lot of people do, they say, here's a paragraph you can put in your will or your trust, make sure that paragraph is a percentage gift and not a cash gift. That simple change is going to take you, 20 minutes to do, might result in millions of dollars in additional giving. So no real excuses not to do it. All right, we are wrapping up soon. Do not forget about beneficiary gifts. So we talked about how quickly some of these asset classes are growing. You want to make sure you're suggesting to folks who are giving you QCDs, who are giving you DAF gifts, who are giving you stock gifts, that they consider naming your organization as a beneficiary. IRA accounts in particular are going to leave heirs with massive taxes, even for folks below the estate tax threshold. And so one charity, which we blacked out the name, does this, where at the end of someone giving a QCD, a gift out of their IRA, they say, hey, would you also like to think about naming us as a beneficiary of your IRA to avoid a bunch of taxes? And you can imagine that when they close a couple of these gifts, these are going to be $500,000, $700,000, $1 million accounts, and just transformative gifts for the organization. So super, super important. All right, that is all that we have. I'm going to share a couple of resources. First one, just a reminder, we're going to give away this book. It's an awesome, awesome book. It is designed to make you much happier. So please at least make a note in the survey to get it. And if you don't get it, feel free to buy it. I think it's probably 20 bucks. I don't know the actual price. Second thing, a couple things we're going to send to you. If you haven't already gotten it, an email template for Stock Monday. By the way, my colleague Simone just put this survey in the chat. It's probably 4 or 5 comments up. So just please click on it. I will paste it again right now just so you have it. But this is how to get the book and all these resources. So first thing we'll send you, besides potentially the book, an email template for Stock Monday, a bunch of stats around how to convince your organization to invest in planned giving, and then also the links to the webinars we talked about. Maybe you're brilliant about this stuff. I would think about who are the junior staff on your team, who needs to learn more about them to share that. We will also make that little note as an invitation to learn about some future crypto innovations we're working hard on. And so hopefully there'll be more to share soon there. But we're really, really excited about that as a way to generate tons more giving. And so just make a note in the survey if you would like to receive these. Other quick notes, on Thursday, we're going to do a quick 30-minute demonstration of how lots of different charities are using different tools to get more stock gifts, to get more QCDs, and to get more bequests. So just make a note here if you want to invite to that. You can always sign up for the invite, and if you miss it, it's okay. My colleagues Alyssa and Cassie are wonderful, and they'll walk everybody through it. And then lastly, if you want a more in-depth walkthrough of how other nonprofits are using these tools, just make a note there, and we'll share how the path from here to almost $5 billion in giving and what that looks like. Okay, so we're going to take a 60-second break. I'm going to go through all the questions. It looks like we have a lot of questions. which is pretty exciting. We've covered a ton here. If you can take the survey in that 60 seconds, I can read all the questions and probably take a sip of tea, and then we'll go from there. Sound good? Thank you, guys. Lots of good questions here. So Cassandra says, what about proposed legislation to tax unrealized capital gains? So this was an idea that was floated for a little while. Our best tea leaf reading of Washington is that this is very unlikely to happen. If it does happen, it will target an extremely small number of people. And so, meaning like dozens or hundreds of billionaires. So it really depends if you have a relationship with one of these billionaires. We'll go much deeper in it, but for the most part, this is not likely to happen. So we've sort of skipped over it. So great question. Jose asks, by the way, when will the recording be available? Usually a few hours. So Zoom has to process it. We get an email together, we send it out. So this will come soon. Ali says, are there still tax advantages to doing a QCD before you're 72? Yes, Ali. Why is this? The money in your IRA is pre-tax, right? The money in your bank account is post-tax. And so you want to conserve post-tax money as much as possible. That pre-tax money is going to get taxed no matter how it comes out. Whether you take a distribution, whether you pass away in 80 years and it goes on to your kids or your spouse or whomever, they have to pay taxes on it. So always better to be giving away pre-tax money than post-tax money, even before you're 72. Now, the catch here is that the government doesn't really allow you to do it until you're 70 and a half. So there's only a small window when you can do that. You can't do it as like someone in your early 40s or late 30s. What are inflation's implications for the stock market? Inflation can have negative effects on the stock market. The other thing that's happening is productivity innovation is through the roof. So there's a lot of different factors going to the stock market right now. Obviously, the supply chain crunch is happening, but generally there's a lot of promising stuff there. And so I wouldn't overly worry about stocks going down. By the way, if you are taking stock gifts as a charity, you're almost always selling them immediately. So you're basically just want those gifts in the door and then you liquidate them. You don't want to hold individual stocks for the most part. There's a good question on the debt ceiling, which I have honestly no idea how to answer. So Dee, I apologize. We'll skip that. What are the implications of inflation on the real estate market and the impact they will have on estate gifts, meaning real estate gifts? So, folks can donate houses to you. It's a little bit more work, but they're going to get a massive tax deduction from it. It's usually independently appraised. So that's something, but housing, if you can turn around and liquidate it quickly, it can be a huge amount of money. And so being open to real estate gifts is going to be quite valuable. This is not academic. I have some sense that the housing market is going to be in bad shape in like 15 years. Now, why is that? You have all these boomers who own all these houses that as they downsize or as they pass away, there are just so many of these like 4 or 5 bedroom suburban houses coming on the market. And I don't know there are enough people that are going to want to buy it. So you may actually see in like 10 years or so, people that are struggling to sell their houses more likely to donate it. So that could happen, but that's just a bit of a best guess at the moment. Will community foundations be part of the ACE Act, or will there be a carve out for them for DAPs? So yes, community foundations are getting really crushed right now compared to the big financial DAPs. And I believe that in the ACE Act, there's a bit of a carve out. And so there are some local, there's basically some requirements for what a community foundation counts as. It has like a 4-state maximum, it's regionally focused. And there's looser rules around them, but they still have some payout requirements as well. So that is super important. Let's see. Should we be promoting beneficiary designations of DAFs if the ACE Act goes through? Meaning asking people to say, hey, can I be the custodian of your DAF if you pass away? The answer is yes. Even for, people will continue to put money in. And so even that 15-year benefit should be important. What's the prediction of whether it will? I would say that the ACE Act has a better than 50% chance of passing. It's one of the few things that is sort of genuinely bipartisan in Congress right now. Who knows how it could get held up? But my guess is that by this time next year, we're talking about it actually passing. What gives greater tax savings, IRA donations, or appreciated stock? I would say, Marcia, great question. There are two big things that we're going to ask here. One is, do you itemize deductions? If you don't, IRA giving, a lot better. If you do, it depends on how much the stock is appreciated. So that will be a determinant. But typically, if you are itemizing deductions and you avoid capital gains and you get a full income tax deduction, that's going to be the best thing. Does FreeWill do private presentations to organizations about non-cash giving? Could I invite Patrick to my annual meeting to make a series of presentations to our donors? The short answer is no. We tend to go sort of all in on supporting our partners. We'll occasionally do trainings for partners specifically, but we tend to put all of our focus there. So great question, flattering, but we can maybe recommend some other trainers if that's useful. All right, let's do one more question. Is there any discussion about disallowing the charitable deduction on appreciated stocks? Is this a possibility we should be concerned about? Bruce, I haven't seen any discussion here. I think that generally you tend to be in favorable environments in both parties, trying to encourage charitable giving. You have a large collection of stakeholders, from colleges to lots of religious institutions, which tend to be quite influential in both parties, and a bunch of other factors. And so that would be surprising. It's possible that people start restricting stocks into DAFs. I haven't seen that, so I don't want to speak out of turn, but I will be extremely surprised if stock giving, there's restrictions on stock giving to 501c3s. Now, what you do see sometimes is caps on how much income, right? 50%, 60% of my AGI I can deduct, but most people aren't giving more than 100% of their AGI. And if they do, they can often carry it forward over several years. So there's a much deeper world we can go there, but that's just a little bit of background. All right, so let's wrap up there. This, by the way, sadly, is the last session we're going to do in 2021, because we want to make sure you guys all get some heads down time on end of year giving. So we have a couple of partner trainings left on, we're going really deep on QCs and stocks. Watch out for those invites. Please join and bring as much of your team as you can. As a reminder, one of the biggest factors on how successful you are here is how well staffed is your team. But just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who's joined, not only this one, but lots of them. You guys are just sort of blowing me away with all that you've accomplished this year. And I hope you have a really happy Thanksgiving, really happy holidays, and look forward to spending a bunch of time together in 2022 and diving into who knows what the world will bring us. So big thank you. Looking forward to seeing you in the new year. And before we close, just a really big thank you to my colleague Simone, who puts a ton of work into these to make sure that we can all learn so much together. So thank you, Simone. Thank you to everybody on this call, and we will see you in 2022. And hopefully we all have a very happy new year together.